Greetings humans, greetings everyone, and welcome to another edition of Doctor Who Fridays. And I'd like to welcome my guests. They are CoquiPirate.
Howdy.
And a newcomer, Dr. Smith.
Hello.
And another newcomer, MidnyteGoddess.
Thank you for letting me get my geek on, Alex. Hi, guys.
You're more than welcome. And tonight we are discussing, I think, is it the 6th or 7th Doctor Who? I think it's the 7th Doctor Who serial. The 6-parter, The Sensorites, which I think I've only seen once or twice before, not recently, I mean years ago. I'm not quite sure what my opinions are. I would say it's a middling story. I don't think it was awful. I don't think it was fantastic. The Sensorites are a pretty good alien. There was a lot of tension, a lot of atmosphere, suspense, I suppose, and there was some complexity to the story, and certain characters I felt kind of shone through. Bit of trivia is that the Sensorites are very, very tentatively, very subtly referred to in the new series. I can't remember, but if I tell you this, it'll seem obvious. The Ood are related to the Sensorites. They're actually like cousin species. So I guess it's like in the same way that I guess like us and bonobos, that kind of thing. It's like distant cousin species, and there are definitely resemblances, I think, between them. One thing you don't really notice, which you always see in pictures of the shooting of this, is that the Sensorites had feet that were perfect discs. Which I always thought was as the only alien I've ever seen that had perfect discs for feet. And I don't think it actually makes it on camera. But anyway. So, Coqui, this, as usual, is the first time in your life you have ever seen this particular serial. What did you think?
I like this arc. And yeah, they do give a couple of shots of their little footsie pajamas and you see the disc shape. Susan was good in the last arc, the Aztec arc, but it really shows in this arc, that they made her, I guess, a bit less of a whiny character. Actually, she's a bit more defiant. She wants to grow up, and she's useful. Even in situations that, are terrifying, she's not doing her usual shrieking number. She's able to stay quiet and hide, and I just think she was done so much better in this serial than the previous ones. I also really like how they subvert sort of the invading alien things, where you have the aliens who are peaceful, and they're like, and the humans look hideous. It's like, well, to them, we might look hideous, and the other person sort of shrugs it off as like, what the fuck, why would they think we look hideous? And yeah, I just thought that was a funny thought, that humans are the invaders, and then you have all of these paranoid sort of local aliens. And it goes to show for good reason, but yeah.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of development too. I like how they felt the need to do a bit of a recap at the beginning of this serial, including a reference to an adventure with Henry VIII, which we never saw. Then you have, I don't know if that maybe the episode needed a bit of padding at that point, and there's that quote of, the curiosity in a junkyard has now turned out to be a great spiritual adventure, comes up in kind of montages and fan trailers and things for Doctor Who. And Susan, of course, because Carol Ann Ford, the actor, when offered the part, was told various things about the characters I've mentioned in a previous podcast, one of which is that it would transpire that she would be psychic, which is actually hinted at in the untransmitted pilot, an alternative version of the first episode. Coqui, you've seen the first episode, you haven't seen the untransmitted pilot. And I think that they thought that it was too scary, so when they reshot the pilot, that was taken out. But in this episode, it's hinted that she has some kind of mild psychic ability, which could be developed later, So at least there was something. I'd completely forgotten. We did briefly have Psychic Susan. And Dr. Smith, your thoughts?
It started out a little slow for me. There were some interesting bits. One of the things that I really loved about it, which I don't think I've ever seen this shot ever again in Doctor Who, was the TARDIS crew walking out the TARDIS doors straight forward into the ship. Have you ever seen another shot like that since?
I think probably yes.
But I mean, like you saw both of the doors open, and then they walk off the TARDIS bridge and they go right onto the ship. And generally, you always see the shot of like the Doctor coming out of the TARDIS. You know, you just see one of the folding doors, and I thought that was just real interesting that they did that. But the business. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The business, because we talked about this in an earlier podcast, the Daleks. Coqui raised this point. The business of the external doors and the internal doors in Classic Who, it's quite bizarre. There are even kind of contradictory shots. Apart from anything else, aren't the doors on the inside much bigger than the doors on the outside? Well, yes. Listen to that sentence. So I think it's maybe part of the illusion of what will one day be named the Chameleon Circuit that hasn't yet been named the Chameleon Circuit. And you just have to kind of allow for it. Because even in the new series, it's a bit weird. Because in the Eccleston era, when you're looking from sideways on, you can see the blue panels on the inside. So it's like, oh, okay, that's some kind of psychic illusion then. Because when you are inside, there are blue panels there. Sorry, carry on.
No, you're fine. As far as it went, though, the setup seemed to be kind of long with getting to the point of what they were trying to say in the story. I kind of feel that they probably could have narrowed this one down to maybe 4 episodes and gotten the point across much better, tighten the story up. As far as you saying that Sensorites being a relation to the Ood, I was just thinking that they would have been a really interesting character to have some sort of a tie-in with the Ood, so I found that interesting. You brought that up.
Aha. But yeah, they've got physical characteristics in common, and they've got some, like the Ood are very trusting, of course, that's one thing. The Ood are kind of the opposite, because the Ood are always mind-controlled. And also humans screwed the Ood over. We used to enslave them. You could see how Russell T Davies would say that he was inspired by the Sensorites, which is interesting to go all the way back to the very first season for your inspiration. Anything else to add?
Overall, like you said, I agree with you 100%. It wasn't a horrible episode or serial, just rather, in ending of it all, I feel they could have tightened it up by just probably knocking it down to 4 stories.
I can kind of see how it was quite long. It's not the most, shall we say, stretched story of the classic era, but and mind you, some stories of the classic era, like the War Games, that's 10 episodes, but that's actually Dalek Master Plan. They're brilliant, and they are right at that length. Could this have been cut down? Yeah, it probably could have been a 4 or 5-parter. And Midnight Goddess. Now, I get the impression that you really like this one.
Actually, I quite enjoyed it. For me, it was interesting because I'm an avid Doctor Who fan of, I guess you'd say the 90s up is where I kind of...
Okay.
So for me, there was it was really interesting because a lot of things are so different. For example, the Doctor being referred to as Grandpa or Grandfather.
Yeah.
And the crotchetiness of the Doctor. And I also found that it was very much a social commentary on how there could never be a utopia because someone is always going to want power. For example, there was a part where Susan was asking the High Chancellor about how the system works and how, and he replies, well, it's based on trust, and which she replies with, trust is earned. And she said some people are always out for themselves and always out for more power. And that is typically why, communism failed. It's typically why most of these societies have failed. And I think that it was just very subtle in certain ways that it located that topic and kind of showed it through different factors. It showed it through the naiveness of the elder chancellor. It showed it through the power hungriness of the city councillor and what the lengths he would go to get it, all the way down to his manipulation and control using the fears of the people to get these things done behind the scenes. So for me, it was really kind of a lot of fun to watch. I actually watched it 3 times.
Wow.
And it just, for me, it was every time I watched it, I found something new I liked about it. The first time I watched it, I absolutely loved the characters that they had put into it and how different it was. And then the second time I watched it, I was able to appreciate more the social commentary. And finally, on the third time that I watched it, it was like watching it and being able to literally pick out where things would falter and fault in a society, what things would work, how that's when I noticed that it actually looked at a failure of utopia from a naive point of view, from a power-hungry point of view, from a neutral point of view, which was Susan, and from an idealistic point of view, which would have been the Doctor. So I thought that it was really great that each one of these characters were able to show a different type of way that even in their best interest, the utopia would fail. And that no matter how righteous we want to make a society and how well we want to govern it, someone is always going to try and get something for themselves. And while that is a depressing kind of message, it's also a very realistic one, which I think is very gutsy of them, especially for the time it was made in. You didn't have a lot of things that were doing social commentary, especially anything that would relate to, like, the communist and Marxist philosophies. And so it was very bold of them to do that, because that is really what a Marxist or communist society would be facing. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'll probably watch it for a 4th time. Or no,
wow.
I'll go back and start from number 1 and watch them all. So.
Oh, definitely.
I think she brings up some great points about what was one of the strengths of this episode, because I just finished watching the last episode a little while ago, and Susan making the point of, you got to step on ground and see if it's good. How did she say it exactly? Help me out.
You must step on the ground before you can trust that it is solid.
Yeah, I thought that was a great little analogy that she threw into that. Yeah. This episode is definitely, now this is one of the high points of it, I think it's definitely one of the more solid episodes in terms of you could go back to it and it still rings true, and it's interesting in the fact that it's strong on that, whereas I'll look at episodes where it's like, it doesn't really fit in with the time and the date now, and they're a little dated. This one doesn't.
That's very true, because even today, the same principle can be applied to what's going on in our government.
Yes.
Like our respective governments. I know we're from all different places in the world. So I think it really does show the economics, like not the economic state, but the state that our governments, our respective governments are in. All being from different countries, we can all kind of appreciate it from a different perspective. But it was really, it could be put into color and put out on television right now, and it would still be just as relevant today, because we haven't learned from our past, so we're doomed to repeat it, and that's the cycle that we're in. And I think another message from that was at the end, you could see the first chancellor, he had been convinced, you could see that there was an actual intellectual change with him, and where the trust was not going to be given so readily. It was going to have to be earned because this trust had been betrayed. So I think it was kind of him learning from his mistakes so he won't be doomed to repeat them. Kind of like an ideal solution to having this happen, like constant, like over and over again.
Coqui, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that there's an interesting statement about trust to be made, but it kind of goes both ways when you think about it. Because on the one hand, you had the beginning, which, yeah, I suppose it could have been condensed, but at the same time, I really like the suspense it builds up. These unseen monsters, you know they must be horrible, horrible creatures because of what they're doing. And, you know, you have this impression of them, except they turned out to be rather timid, agreeable folk. You know, you mentioned the Ood thing. Actually, as soon as I saw one of them pressing what I looked like a stethoscope onto their head, I'm like, this is kind of like the Ood, but I didn't say anything about that. But, you know, they were timid folk, even though they come off as like these terrifying sort of creatures that apparently don't need to breathe and can survive in the vacuum of space, but I won't comment too much on that. And then on the other hand, when you go to the planet, you know, so first you have this one impression, people are, I guess it's not so much that they trust too much, but rather they were predisposed not to trust, even though these beings were actually quite passive. And then on the other hand, you go to the planet, and you have these creatures, these, I guess I can call them people, they were so willing to trust that their caste system, that their hierarchy, that everything falls into place. You know, it's like, because that's the system that works. And they're, like, when a human brings up, like, some people want more power, they're like, oh, that must be a human quality. You know, they have this trust in their system, which I don't think is unique to communism or, you know, what came to mind when I saw it was actually the Indian caste system. But it can apply to a broad range of different governments that, you know, you can't just trust the system and think, well, they must be happy with their roles and not being to strive to get higher because it's such a good system that works. You know, there is no such thing as a perfect system. Or if there is, you know, it's so much easier to imagine how it would fail anyway. But, you know, and then that whole trusting is turned on its head because not only are what were initially terrifying, these creatures, they were initially more terrifying but turned out to be rather timid. But in the end, spoiler alert, if you don't want spoilers, I don't know why you're watching this, the humans turn out to be the savage creatures that are mass poisoning these aliens. You know, the aliens were, they were, well, they're not aliens, they were indigenous, humans are the aliens, but, you know, they were afraid because, you know, they knew that humans would come in greater fleets for their resources and whatnot. We were the invading aliens. We were, you know, the villains in this. And that's why I think this is a really cool, really dynamic episode in that sense.
Okay.
You mentioned that the humans are the one poisoning them, but when you get to the portion as they're coming out, you do realize after watching it 3 times, the gentleman makes a comment to the doctor and about the people that have been poisoning, and it's almost inferred, like the city councillor, the one who was behind a lot of this stuff, he was also behind them. Because in the episode itself, when he found out originally that the doctor was going to go down there, he said, oh, don't worry, no one ever comes out of there. So it's like he knew that, you know, something would happen if he went down. And he didn't show the same concern, and he didn't show the same fear of the quote-unquote monsters that everyone else was so scared of. So it took a couple watchings to get that, but I just wanted to point that out because I don't know if you noticed that, Coqui.
Yeah, when he said that, I was just under the impression that because the humans had killed all of the people who went in there before, they thought the humans would surely kill. Well, he didn't know they were. I was under the impression that since he didn't know, since he just thought, since they were described that way, and they were described as these horrible, ugly monsters, which I think is also really interesting, because again, to them, we are the ugly ones. So if anything, I thought it was just more of a legend that no one makes it out alive, and the legend is substantiated because the humans would kill them. But I suppose I can see it. I can understand your point of view as well, and that could have been why that the city councilor was in on it the whole time.
Yeah. I find it interesting that they would evolve to have no night vision and not to tell each other apart from markers for rank and social station.
Well,
I could tell them apart.
He said that it was only from a distance that they would need the sashes. He did make the other gentleman said
okay.
that they could tell each other apart, but if in a distance, the sash is what you would rely on.
Right. Okay. I was gonna say the whole kind of like I'll impersonate you by wearing your sash. That's
Well, if you notice, he made a point of staying away from people.
Okay.
He stayed at a distance.
And as for the kind of social commentary and political side of it, I guess it probably was unusual at the time, at least for a drama, and especially a Saturday evening kind of thing. From a science fiction point of view, obviously this is a couple of years before the very first Star Trek even. So the closest I can think of is probably America had the Twilight Zone, which started in '59. Obviously, Twilight Zone had lots of social comment and political angles, and obviously, again, like Doctor Who, a very post-war show. Well, less post-war, but they're both very Cold War shows.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, you talking about Twilight Zone? This episode reminded me of a Twilight Zone episode. It was the one where all through the episode, this woman is talking and she's bandaged up and she's talking about getting a surgery. And at the end of the episode, they take the bandages off, and you see that she's a beautiful-looking woman, and everybody in that world has got like a pig face.
Yeah, I remember that one.
This episode of the Sensorites made me think of that.
Ah, interesting. Was there any particular thing about it that...
just mainly how we couldn't tell them apart, and how they could tell each other apart.
So it's a question of perspective kind of thing, and... Okay, yeah. Okay. And I tell you what, can I just check with people, how familiar... well, obviously, I mean, CoquiPirate is watching these for the first time. Dr. Smith, how many William Hartnell episodes, or serials rather, have you seen before?
Well, I've seen Unearthly Child, which I think is a pretty decent opener. I've seen The Aztecs, and then I've seen this one, and I've seen bits of The 10th Planet. I've never seen it all the way through. I gotta be honest, I'm not a huge Hartnell fan. I'm more of a Patrick Troughton fan. As far as classic Who goes, I think you really can't go wrong with any of the Troughton episodes.
So how do you think this ranks out of the... We'll go with 60. Oh, no, well, say 60s I've got to allow for the fact that you prefer Troughton. So, out of the Hartnells that you've seen, how do you think this ranks?
It's definitely better than the Aztecs. The Aztecs, a lot of people are like, oh, it's one of the best Who's. I was kind of bored with it, honestly.
Oh.
And I had a talk with Dr. Who Man before about this, and I think what it boils down to is the historical classic Who episodes I just don't care for. I want a little more sci-fi. So I think that's why I like the Sensorites better than the Aztecs.
No, Dr. Smith, that's really kind of bizarre because I've watched like the more science fiction-y up to now stuff, and I was sitting there and I absolutely loved the black and white and the kind of old radio show feel to the episode. It's funny that you say you want more sci-fi and things like that, where I had this opposite, very nostalgic feeling of like sitting up, curled up with a blanket, listening to AM radio, top TV shows, or watching an old black and white movie, things like that. So it's really that we had opposite reactions to that.
I like that kind of stuff too, but I think what it boils down to with the Hartnell generation or series compared to the Troughton is, to my understanding, they would kind of ad-lib some of the things during the Troughton era, whereas with the Hartnell era. Whereas when the Troughton era came in, they kind of didn't do as much of that. They would work out things and whatnot. And I don't know, have you seen any of the Troughton episodes yet?
Not yet, I don't believe.
Well,
you'll get to them.
Yeah, when you get to those, I think you'll see why I like them more. Look, I'm not going to take anything away from William Hartnell's stuff. There's still great stories in there. I know that. I just haven't gotten to see enough of them to really say, well, okay, I really dig that era. So far, I've just seen a few that are like, yeah, they're not bad.
I have to say, actually, I think you're the only fan who knows the classic series who doesn't like the Aztecs. Me, you, James, Coqui. I say Coqui. It's still your favourite one so far, isn't it?
Yeah, I find it. Our tastes are clearly very different. I very much wanted to move away from the sci-fi stuff, and because he has a time machine, and I certainly loved Marco Polo and the Aztecs, but I guess everyone has their own sort of inclinations.
And now, Midnight Goddess. This is your first William Hartnell story, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And you sound quite enthusiastic that you want to go back to Unearthly Child and watch all of the first Doctor era.
I'm going to be doing that in my time when I'm my free time. It really reminded me of, like I was saying, like that old AM radio kind of feel, and that reminds me of my grandmother who passed away about a year ago, and so for me it's more than just that they're interesting. It's almost like being able to like curl up with her for that 30 minutes that I'm watching, or it's because it's a serial. Like, so for that 30 minutes, it's like I can block everything out, and it's like I'm sitting with my Omi and we're having a cup of tea and we're watching something together. Like, it gives me that kind of feeling. So I think that I'm really going to end up being partial to this particular style of Doctor Who.
Yeah, and I think you'll like You're right, Dr. Smith.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. And I think you'll like William Hartnell. The first Doctor, he's a bit of a shock at first, but he does grow on you.
I just found him very bizarrely different, like very, very crass and very, very rude. And I was thinking, as a Time Lord, he would have learned manners by now. Basic common courtesies that my child knows. He doesn't say please, he doesn't say thank you, he doesn't, he's just very, very crass, he's very rude, and you can totally see the Time era because he's totally sexist.
One of the things I've noticed about the Troughton era that I think needs to be pointed out is it seems as the show progresses with him, towards the end of his run, he seems to have mellowed out, not be as crabby as...
You meant Hartnell then?
Yes, I always get the two mixed up, and I apologize. With the Hartnell era, it seems that he becomes less crabby as the series progresses with him.
Yeah, he's pretty unpleasant in the first few episodes, and I think also there's, as we've discussed, there's all the conflict between the characters. Because not wanting to give too many spoilers to Midnight, but no, this was actually in the serial that Barbara mentioned. They just want to get home. Ian and Barbara didn't go, I want this. Not like nowadays. Come with me, run with me. You agree to an adventure. They're only consenting because the Doctor can't get them back. So there's that element as well where, in terms of the emotions and the dynamic of these first 7 serials, which is quite a long time span. We've watched quite a few months worth of Doctor Who, me and Cokie, doing this series. You know, they've been through their trials and tribulations, they've had conflicts, and there's a bit of bonding. Although, actually, one thing was bizarre. At the end of this, at the end of the final episode of this serial, the Doctor just turns on Ian, just snaps at him. I'm going to dump you wherever we land. I'm chucking you out. And then it says, and then the name of the next episode is something really ominous, like Land of Terror or something.
I think it's Land of Destruction or something like that.
Yeah.
I found that was another thing I noticed. It was like his whole like alpha male vibe. You know, like I'm superior. What? Oh, how dare you mock that I don't know directions. I'm going to throw you out because I'm a whiny little bitch.
I was going to say that to take the first couple of episodes, to call him unpleasant is an understatement. The Doctor is a monster. He is just a horrible, horrible creature in the first serial and a little bit in the second.
Yeah, I suppose. As for his alpha male vibe, I suppose because of his age, and I suppose people still had more of a respect your elders feeling in those days, and you could still put your children over your knee. In fact, there is a line, I don't remember what serial it is, but there is a line that at one point the Doctor does threaten to spank Susan. I can't remember. It's like his 15-year-old granddaughter is like, "You're not too old to go over my knee, young lady." But, you know, he's an old, eccentric academic. He's meant to be a bit grumpy. I think him and the TARDIS are meant to have a lot in common. That they're old models. They don't run that well. They could be a bit temperamental. And obviously, I suppose he does have... All Doctors have that sense of superiority that comes from being a Time Lord. Not that they've mentioned Time Lords or Gallifrey at this point in the story. In fact, Cokie asked, do we even know the Doctor has two hearts at this point? No, they've not mentioned that yet either.
You know, Alex, one of the points you just brought up is they hadn't mentioned Gallifrey, but you see an alluding to of Gallifrey when
Yes.
Susan's talking about the description of their homeworld.
Yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that description with the burnt orange sky and stuff like that, they go all the way back to 1963 for that description. So whenever you see Gallifrey, to this day, it has the burnt orange sky. They've literally like CGI designed a description that was written in 1963 of a planet that we hadn't seen. So yeah, I'm glad you raised that. Yes, the first time their home planet is ever described. But we get a description. We still don't get a name. It's still a mystery. We don't know they're Gallifreyans. We don't know they're Time Lords. We just know they're otherworldly, and Susan is a tiny bit psychic, and there was a mention of them having visited the place with psychic plants. You know, I want to see psychic plants. I need to do that. No, I'm going to write to Stephen Hawking. I want psychic plants.
I just think it's great that they're playing such homage, like if from the new series back to like like you said, with the burnt orange sky and things like of that nature. I think it's great when a series has run for such a long time and has such, you know, iconic themes to it, that it plays homage to itself, but back in the day from when it was like just a tiny little show, you know, where it's kind of like remembering where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say that bit when I asked, do they know that the Doctor, or is it established that the Doctor has two hearts? It was when they were planning on incinerating their hearts after they sat down, and they asked the question, so are their hearts on the left or on the right or in the center like ours? Because somehow they knew that humans had a cardiovascular system just like theirs, like they just presume here. And they also presume that we can eat their food, which is kind of interesting. But they just don't know which side it's on. Really?
Oh, and the fact that they could speak the language and the food didn't poison them, and, you know, everyone talked to each other in the same language, you know.
Well, no, the TARDIS, well, it's not been explained yet. Right, so far in Doctor Who, cavemen have spoken English, Daleks and Thals have spoken English, everybody in Marco Polo spoke English, Aztecs have spoken English. It will eventually be explained. The TARDIS has a universal translator, it's a psychic thing that if you travel on board, and they've explored that quite interestingly, I think. It will be explained. At this point, you know, cavemen sound like Shakespearean actors from England. You just,
now just thinking about that episode of Tenet, fighting that alien, and then like in mid-conversation, his voice sounded more and more like English. But that's a funny thought. But I also have to ask, with what water were they restocking the spaceship?
Oh. Okay, that could be a plot hole.
It had a couple plot holes. Don't get me started on the plot holes.
No, go on. Tell us the plot holes.
Okay, I
hate
plot holes. Plot holes annoy me to no end. First of all, the first plot hole is when they're asking the neurologist how to lock the door. Now, when he locked it the first time, before we knew it was him, he just waved his hand in front of the locking mechanism. Then when he taught them how to lock it, he waved his hand once and pushed up the locking mechanism. So there's your first plot hole. Then when the fact that the air was breathable, that the food was edible, that the water was okay, you know, that they knew all about the body system of humans, that all of these things, that they didn't accidentally give poison water to the people on the crew, like on the ship, you know, and then the antidote, it gets taken away by the city counselor, is when he's dressed up as the second chancellor, and we never see that next vial of medicine get to John, I believe his name is?
Yeah.
It never gets to John. All of a sudden, John is just okay.
Ian, you mean? John was the one with the mental thing.
Oh, sorry, right, yeah.
Yeah, Ian was the one that got sick.
Yeah, Ian.
It's Ian, the companion, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so you never actually see him get the medicine, and you never actually see anyone yell at anybody for the medicine not being there. There's no alludement to there's no one alludes to how, oh yeah, we brought him the medicine, nothing like that. When John and his fiance are talking, and they're talking about a nice juicy steak, there's the fruit that they're eating, it changes. If you look at it, it's not the same shape from one scene to another. So that kind of stuff really annoys me, so I tend to pick up on it.
Okay, so there's a couple of what we call in the fandom wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey moments. Well, they're not big enough to be wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey, and we can't blame Moffat for things he wasn't even born yet for. But we can try. But,
we can blame Obama.
I was just thinking that, yes. Thanks, Obama. I thought I had another thought, but I can't remember quite what it was. So I'm just going to open up the floor for anyone who wants to add anything at this point.
I think the Sensorites would be an excellent character to bring back to modern Doctor Who, even if it was a cameo.
Well, do you think they'd be still friends with the Ood, or do you think that there might be conflict with the Ood?
Hard to say. You know,
conflict with humans for enslaving the Ood.
Well,
I think what could go ahead. I'm sorry, Cokie.
Oh, I was going to say that you, Alex said they were cousin species or something. So I'm assuming they're from the same planet. Are they sort of primitive animals on that planet, or are they in different phases of evolution? You know, like Ood are more primitive Sensorites, or maybe Sensorites, eventually collapse and become the Ood. Their relationship would be an interesting one to expound upon.
I think it's that the Sensorites that migrated from the Sense Sphere to the Ood Sphere then went on to evolve differently, or rather that there's a common ancestor that travelled from one planet to the other, and they've evolved since.
Oh, so it's Sensorite colonists that became the Oods, and not Oodish colonists that became the Sensorites?
That's my understanding,
okay.
Yes.
It kind of reminds me of when Star Trek, when they went back in time, and there was no bumps on the Klingon's head, and someone said to Worf, why don't the heads look the same? And he turned around and went very stoically, and he was like, we don't talk about that time period.
I know, but they talk about plot holes. They messed up that continuity when they had when they made Enterprise. But anyway, screw Enterprise. Screw any Star Trek that after Voyager got home. So, anyway.
I don't know. I see like I see like a sort of parallel with the Ood and the Sensorites, much like there's the Silurians and the Sea Devils.
Yeah.
And I think it's always fascinating to see those cousin races interact. And
yeah.
I don't know. I've been waiting for the Sea Devils to come back for a while because I think that they're interesting enough to where they could do something in this modern day age, make them interesting. The Silurians' appearance was okay to me, but I'd rather see Sea Devils because they always seem to be a good bad guy for the Doctor to go up against.
But and these two have to wait before they know what a Sea Devil is. Well, they'll have garnered something from that, but
I'm
maybe
still
not
wondering about the great intelligence and how long before that's a thing.
Oh, God, there's so much. I was thinking today, actually, when I went to the shop, I was thinking about the show. And I was thinking, Cokie must be thinking, when are we going to see the Master for the first time? When are we going to see Cybermen for the first time? All those things. You did ask me when the sonic screwdriver first appears, but I don't want to give a specific spoiler. So yes, there are so many things that the modern fan of Doctor Who takes for granted that back in the first season, over 50 years ago, hadn't been decided on yet.
You know, one of the things I was thinking about with this episode was how we talked earlier about how the Doctor was cranky and then he became much easier to deal with in later episodes. One of the thoughts I've had is, did they always intend for the Doctor to just be this crabby-assed old man? Because, you know, originally, like we know, they didn't intend for him to ever regenerate. That kind of, like, came into the whole thought process much later on.
Have you seen, without giving too many spoilers, have you seen the docudrama Adventure in Space and Time?
Yes.
Okay, well that gives you some kind of idea because, and I can verify for much of the veracity of that, as much as they took a few liberties because it is a narrative film, it's a biopic essentially. But basically, William Hartnell, who had this career playing army officers, gangsters, cops, he always had these tough guy roles, and he'd done movies and stuff. And why would he do just like some TV show on Saturday afternoons or Saturday evenings? And he wanted he's basically told that the character he has a dark side, but he also has a twinkle. And one of the things actually was that, you know, I think he very strongly felt that the character was too harsh. He'd been promised something else, you know, and they actually did agree, yeah, this will work. You need a bit more of a twinkle. Also want to point out, this is what I was, I'm going to, at this point, because we're nearly at the end of the first, well, we've got one more serial to go before we've completed the first season. I'm going to go round and ask you what you think of this. Verity Lambert's treatment for Doctor Who, the treatment that got Doctor Who, what's her pitch? Verity Lambert's pitch to get Doctor Who was C.S. Lewis meets H.G. Wells meets Father Christmas. For Father Christmas, read Santa Claus, I assume you know. Yeah. Well, nowadays they're the same thing. So, Cokie, C.S. Lewis meets H.G. Wells meets Santa Claus. Do you think that they were true to this pitch? Do you see that in the show you're watching?
I don't know. I guess I kind of see the. If anything, I think that's truer for whatchamacallit, Matt Smith as the Doctor than what I'm seeing now. But I guess I do see that sort of. I mean, I kind of see the cross. They got the feeling of wonder, and you have like the. No, I would not want the Doctor to be Santa Claus. He's just a horrible Santa. I can kind of see it, but if anything, I think it becomes truer in youth, particularly, the Matt Smith era.
Okay, I think that's what a lot of people forget is in some cultures, Santa Claus is a bit dark, and sometimes he's not human, he's a goblin. Germans have a good one and an evil one who punishes you with a rod. So maybe 50 or so years ago, the British had a slightly darker idea of Santa Claus, perhaps, or Father Christmas, as we call him. Dr. Smith, do you see C.S. Lewis, H.G. Wells, and Santa Claus in original Doctor Who?
C.S. Lewis, absolutely. H.G. Wells, most definitely. Santa Claus, no. Krampus, maybe. Like I was saying earlier, just Hartnell's portrayal of the Doctor is off-putting at times to me, at least in the first season of the episodes I've seen. He's just such a miserable person and an unearthly child. It's like, I don't know how do I put it? I couldn't really see, no, that's not the way to say it. I'm kind of surprised that they had a show that led you to believe that the main character of the show was such a dark person, because to me that seems really odd for that time. Generally, to my remembrance of older shows, you have characters that are a little more upbeat and they have a moral to the story and whatnot. And whereas you've got William Hartnell playing the Doctor, and looking at that first episode, Unearthly Child, he's just such a miserable old bastard.
I think because, it's post-war Britain. And if you go back to the baby boom generation, if you're British, or any European nation, but I definitely know it's true of the UK, you would just expect parents and grandparents, you would just expect older people. This is, think of the children in the audience in 1963. If you're a child in 63, watching this, you probably wouldn't think of the Doctor as particularly unpleasant or strict or mean or grumpy. You would just think that's what grown-ups are like, because that's what parentage was. That's what, and life was hard. They still had the ration book. They still had Midnight Goddess. C.S. Lewis meets H.G. Wells meets Father Christmas.
I can kind of see it. I'm going to have to watch a few more serials to kind of answer that fully. But I think what you were saying is quite correct. You have to take the time period into account, where this is where parents were far more strict, and I know that he reminds me a lot of my grandfather, who was a very kind man, but spoke like that. Like, it was like, my word is law, so this is how I speak, right? So that's kind of the feel I got from him. And if you've noticed, I keep going back to my grandparents. But yeah, that's the kind of feel I got from him. But he doesn't remind me of like the puffy, happy, sappy Santa Claus. He reminds me really of the old Saint Nicholas of legend and things like that. Because I know when I was younger, we were Santa could watch you and things like that, but it was much more devious. Like, Santa wasn't this big jolly fellow. He was somebody who came if you were naughty. Like, you didn't want Santa really to come because, you'd get punished. The coal in your stocking was punishment. So it was... Yeah. I never, until I came to Ontario from Quebec, I never had a impression of this, happy, fluffy Santa Claus. So, so I could really see the old Saint Nicholas fairy tales, Grimm stories, in him, but I could also see the old world after the war type of mentality in him. So I think I'm going to have to watch a few more serials to find out if I see C.I.C.S. in him or not, but I think it's a pretty good way of describing him.
Prepare yourself for the first 2 or 3 serials of William Hartnell, as Cokie said. Okay, I'm opening up the floor again. Anyone want to add anything?
I kind of wrote this up again, but I kind of want to stress that, I think it's really cool that they have Susan, and she did this in the last arc as well, sort of assert herself as her own person, because she's been a very passive, very cowardly character up until now. And, even if she's not she's still not the independent, dynamic character that the others are, but at least after seeing the way she was for so long, it's great to see her finally assert herself and actually have something useful, the psychic ability. It's a shame they didn't stick with it. But yeah, definitely the best arc for Susan.
Yeah, I think it's nice the way that her character is shaping up. Plus, and, she finally got to be a bit psychic. Okay, well, shall we just have goodbyes and final thoughts? I'll go alphabetically again. Cokie, your final thoughts and goodbye.
My final thoughts are, if someone doesn't know how they're being mind-controlled, you can go a day or 2 without eating. I don't understand how you say, I'm hungry, let's check your pantry now that you've been mind-controlled. I don't know. Of course it wasn't the food, though. Alien food isn't poisonous at all, apparently. But it was still rather interesting for them to be so trusting. To think, a creature that could survive in space has the exact same diet as us. But, okay, now I'm just ranting. Have a good day.
Yes, well, they've got a radiation counter on the TARDIS to warn them about radiation. Maybe the Doctor can look at the console for other information about what plants are grown there, and because, they can breathe everywhere they go as well. Like, the TARDIS never ever goes anywhere where they walk out the door and they're like, Doctor... sorry.
Sorry, I already said my final thoughts. I should be dead at this point, but I'm zombifying just to point out that there was a bit, I'm not sure if it was with Rose or with Amy, that the TARDIS was in the vacuum of space, and he held her and let her float out in space. So clearly the TARDIS does, provide them with some means of breathing.
Actually, I think there is something, it's a long time before we see it, but there is some kind of explanation along those lines, kind of remote TARDIS breathing. And Dr. Smith, your final thought and goodbye.
My final thoughts, if I were to give this like a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give this episode a 6. It's not bad. It's worth watching. But again, I'd say they could have shortened it down to 4 episodes and tightened the story up and made it a little more dynamic in that manner. Other than that, It was fun being on. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And I'll agree, it's definitely worth more than a 5. I would say, like a 6 sounds about fair. Actually, it's never occurred to me before to ask people on the show to put a rating out of 10. Maybe I'll install that as a permanent fixture. So thanks, I'm stealing that from you.
Hey, no worries.
And Midnight Goddess, your final thoughts and goodbye.
I really, really enjoyed this. I'll go with the rating scale. I'd personally give it an 8. I really, really, really enjoyed it, and I'm going to go back and over the next few weeks watch the other episodes, other serials, so that I can catch up and things like that. And thank you for letting me get my geek on, Alex. I quite enjoyed being on this. It's a far change from London After Midnight, topic-wise, so thank you very much for having me on.
It's great, and I hope to have... I'm glad those silent. I was just thinking, what's happened? I'm hoping to have both Dr. Smith and Midnight Goddess on again in future. And since they each got to give a ranking, Cokie, how would you rate this out of 10?
I don't like 1 out of 10. I'm putting this in between Marinus and Marco Polo, which would make it 3rd.
Okay, that's cool. Do I have any final thoughts? Oh, well, next week will be the last of the season, The Reign of Terror, and because that's partially a reconstruction, 2 of the 6 episodes are missing, so they've done a recon job, I'm going to touch wood, if he's available, get Derek Handley, who is behind Loose Cannon's Telesnap reconstructions, to sit with me as a kind of a literal guest as well as an internet guest. So if we want to talk about the recons, or if we have any questions about Telesnap reconstructions, and also is something of obviously an expert. So we may have a special guest next week. That's about it. So it's a good night from me. And next episode, The Reign of Terror. Da-diddle-a-dum, da-diddle-a-dum, da-diddle-a-dum.